Some people inherit a throne, a fortune, or an empire so powerful it should survive anything. Then they somehow destroy it faster than a drunk guy handling fireworks. In this video, we are counting down 10 heirs who got handed everything and still managed to wreck kingdoms, dynasties, and family empires with panic, vanity, delusion, or plain world-class stupidity. Number 1. Emperor Qinzong, the magic fix. Emperor Qinzong of Song did not inherit a calm throne. He inherited a nightmare. The Jurchen Jin army was already hammering at the capital, Kaifeng, and the dynasty needed disciplined military command, not fantasy role-play. Instead of trusting capable generals, the court lurched into superstition and panic. This wasn't just a military failure, it was a total collapse of rational governance in the face of an existential threat. The Northern Song dynasty was a marvel of the medieval world, a land of proto-industrialization, massive standing armies, and a civil service that was the envy of the East. But Qinzong was a man paralyzed by the weight of his father's artistic indulgences and his own inability to lead. When the Jin invaders reached the walls, the city was arguably still defensible. They had the numbers, the walls, and the technology. What they lacked was a leader who believed in physics. One notorious episode says Qinzong put faith in a local wonderworker named Guo Jing, who claimed to be a master of the divine arts. This man promised that he could summon thousands of magical soldiers from the celestial realms who would materialize and slaughter the Jin army with supernatural protection. In a moment that defines elite-level incompetence, Qinzong actually ordered the city gates to be opened so the magic could work. The only thing that entered the city was the enemy. The result was catastrophic. Kaifeng fell, Qinzong was captured with his father, and the Northern Song effectively collapsed. He inherited a huge state, and under pressure chose vibes over strategy. History is absolutely full of bad decisions, but opening the door for a magic fix while an invasion is already underway is the gold standard for how to lose an empire in a single afternoon. Number 2. Huntington Hartford, the aesthetic sinkhole. Huntington Hartford inherited one of America's great retail fortunes, the A&P supermarket money. The kind of fortune that should buy you several generations of safety, even if you were only half awake. In the mid-20th century, A&P was the largest retailer in the world, a literal grocery monopoly that printed money. Hartford was not half awake, he was energetically weird, and he viewed his billions not as a legacy to protect, but as a fuel source for his own eccentricities. Hartford was a man who hated the boring reality of the business world. He didn't want to talk about supply chains or profit margins, he wanted to be a cultural titan. He poured enormous sums into Paradise Island in the Bahamas, attempting to turn it into a high-society utopia that bled cash like a severed artery. He built a massive museum in Manhattan to house his personal art collection, which the critics largely mocked and the public ignored. But his most bizarre side quests were his most expensive. He funded a handwriting institute because he believed he could decode human personality through penmanship. He spent millions on stage plays and films that he wrote or produced himself, which consistently flopped. He lived like a glamorous cultural prince, funding things that sounded elegant and ended like financial sinkholes. This was not one bad bet. It was a lifestyle built around setting money on fire in expensive neighborhoods. By the end, the man born into supermarket dynasty wealth was living far more modestly and renting a house. He did not lose everything in a single explosion. He bled it away with taste, confidence, and absolutely no breaks. It takes a special kind of dedication to spend an entire grocery empire on handwriting analysis and Bahamian sand, but Huntington Hartford was nothing if not dedicated. Number 3. Emperor Honorius, the Chicken King. Emperor Honorius inherited the Western Roman Empire at the exact moment when the Western Roman Empire was becoming less a government and more a slow public collapse. When he took the throne as a child, he inherited the legacy of Augustus, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius. He also inherited a military that was falling apart and a capital that was staring down the Goths.
The most famous story about him is probably apocryphal, but honestly it survives because it feels emotionally true. In 410 AD, the city of Rome was sacked by Alaric, the first time in 800 years a foreign enemy had breached the walls. When a messenger arrived at the imperial villa in Ravenna to tell Honorius that Rome has perished, the emperor supposedly began to weep and wail in a panic. But he wasn't crying for the millions of citizens or the heart of his empire. He thought the messenger meant his favorite pet chicken, which was also named Rome. When the messenger clarified that no, actually, it was the eternal city that had been burned and looted, Honorius was reportedly relieved. He wiped his eyes and thanked the heavens that his poultry was safe. Even if the anecdote was polished by later writers, it captures the basic problem perfectly. A ruler in Ravenna, detached from reality, presiding over disintegration, while the old capital fell to the Visigoths. Imagine inheriting Rome and somehow coming off like a man whose biggest concern is poultry inventory. That is less emperor behavior and more badly managed farm energy. Honorius didn't just lose the city, he lost the dignity of the office.
Number 4. Sultan Ibrahim, the madness of the cage. Sultan Ibrahim the Mad inherited the Ottoman Empire after years of trauma, confinement, and paranoia in the palace cage system. This was a brutal tradition where princes were locked away in isolated rooms to prevent them from staging coups against the reigning sultan. It was meant to ensure stability, but it often turned princes into nervous wrecks before they ever reached the throne. When Ibrahim finally got power, he didn't use it to lead, he used it to indulge every erratic impulse he had developed during his years of imprisonment. Contemporary and later accounts describe a ruler obsessed with luxury, furs, and a very specific sexual fixation. He reportedly spent astronomical sums on ambergris and perfumes, and he had a famous obsession with very large women, even searching the empire for the heaviest woman he could find to name as his favorite. While Ibrahim was decorating the palace in sable furs and chasing his compulsions, the governance of the Ottoman state slid into absolute chaos. His mother, the powerful Kösem Sultan, tried to manage the state behind his back, but Ibrahim's erratic behavior made it impossible. He once reportedly ordered his entire harem to be drowned in the Bosporus because of a rumor of infidelity. This is the problem with inheriting one of the world's most formidable empires while being psychologically shredded before your first official decree. Ibrahim did not build authority, he dissolved it into spectacle. The government staggered, the janissaries, the elite military, lost patience, and eventually the elites decided the empire was safer without him. He was deposed and killed by strangulation. When your own guards decide the world is better off without you breathing, that is the ultimate failing grade for an heir. Number 5. Caligula, the treasury challenger. Caligula inherited the Roman Empire with a full treasury left by his predecessor, Tiberius. Tiberius was a miser who had hoarded billions of sesterces, leaving the empire in the strongest financial position it had seen in decades. Caligula looked at that mountain of gold and treated it like a challenge coin. He wanted to see how fast he could hit zero. He pushed imperial display into the realm of grotesque theater. He didn't just host games, he hosted month-long spectacles that drained the city's resources. He built a bridge of ships across the Bay of Baiae just so he could ride his horse across the water, simply because a fortune-teller once told him he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the bay. It was a multi-million sesterce "I told you so." The horse-made consul story is the most famous part of his legacy. While it was likely a dark joke intended to insult the Senate, suggesting a horse could do their job better, it fits the pattern. He wanted power to feel humiliating for everyone else. He turned the palace into a place of fear and personal chaos, spending the state's wealth on massive villas and floating pleasure barges that were essentially temples to his own ego. Rome could survive military strain or political struggle, but it could not survive an emperor who behaved like the treasury was a party prop.
Caligula burned through the entire wealth of the Roman world in less than 4 years. By the time he was assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard, he had turned a golden age into a bankruptcy. He inherited gold and left only the memory of his own madness. Number 6. Edward VIII, the royal rage quit. Edward VIII inherited not just a kingdom, but the largest empire on earth. He was the head of a global machine with colonies, dominions, ceremony, and enough inherited symbolism to crush a normal person flat. He was the most popular prince in British history, a modernizing figure who promised to bring the monarchy into the 20th century. He kept it for less than a year. The 1936 abdication crisis was not some cute romantic tantrum with a violin soundtrack. It was a constitutional meltdown. Edward was a man who hated the grind of kingship. He didn't like the red boxes of state papers, he didn't like the advice of his ministers, and he certainly didn't like the rules. When he insisted on marrying Wallis Simpson, an American, twice-divorced woman, he hit a wall. The church, the government, and the people would not accept her as queen. Instead of finding a compromise or putting his duty before his desires, Edward made the ultimate royal rage quit. He chose the marriage and walked away from the throne, leaving his brother, who never wanted the job, to pick up the pieces on the eve of World War II. It was a staggering abandonment of responsibility. There is a strange purity to it. Other heirs on this list cling to power while ruining everything around them. Edward looked at the crown, looked at the restrictions attached to it, and basically said, "Then keep it." It is one of history's cleanest examples of inheriting everything and instantly discovering that duty was not really your thing. He spent the rest of his life as a socialite in exile, a king who decided he'd rather have a cocktail in Paris than an empire in London. Number 7. Edgar Bronfman Jr., the media mirage. Edgar Bronfman Jr. inherited Seagram, a liquor empire so stable and profitable it practically printed dynastic permanence. For generations, the Bronfmans were the kings of whiskey and gin. Their cash flow was so immense that they held a massive stake in DuPont, which acted as a financial safety net for the entire family. Then Edgar Jr. took the wheel. He decided he didn't want to be the steward of a boring cash machine. He wanted to be a media emperor. He wanted the glamour of Hollywood and the prestige of the music industry. That impulse led Seagram away from its dependable liquor base and towards the volatile world of entertainment. To fund his dream of acquiring Universal Studios and Polygram, Bronfman made the fatal decision to sell the family stake in DuPont. At the time, DuPont was a rock-solid chemical giant. Selling it to buy a movie studio was like trading a gold mine for a lottery ticket. For a while, it looked bold. Bronfman was the toast of Hollywood. But the entertainment business is a brutal, high-risk game. Universal struggled, and Bronfman's lack of experience in the industry became painfully clear. By the time the Vivendi merger happened, the multi-generational family fortune took a brutal hit. The Seagram name, once synonymous with power and stability, was effectively swallowed up and dissolved. This is what happens when an heir decides predictable profit is too uncool. He traded a liquid empire for a media mirage, and in the process, he ended a dynasty that had taken a century to build.
Number 8. Atahualpa, the fatal misread. Atahualpa is one of the most brutal examples of winning everything and then losing it almost immediately. He inherited half the Inca world, then fought a savage, years-long civil war against his brother Huáscar to claim the rest. He emerged as the sole ruler of a massive, sophisticated empire that stretched across the Andes, commanding tens of thousands of battle-hardened soldiers. He was at the peak of his power when Francisco Pizarro arrived with only about 168 Spaniards. On paper, this was not an invasion. It was a very suspicious field trip. Atahualpa, confident in his thousands of guards, agreed to meet Pizarro in the square of Cajamarca. He believed he was the son of the sun, untouchable and supreme.
He underestimated the danger of steel, horses, and men who had nothing to lose. In a single afternoon, the Spanish staged a shock ambush. They captured Atahualpa in front of his entire army, who were paralyzed by the strange technology and the capture of their living god. The Spanish did not conquer the Inca through a massive war. They snatched the head off the body of the state. Few heirs have ever held absolute power so briefly. Atahualpa went from being the most powerful man in the Western Hemisphere to a prisoner in a single hour. He offered a room full of gold as a ransom, which the Spanish took, and then they executed him anyway. It was a fatal misread of a new reality, proving that inheriting an empire doesn't mean you have the instincts to keep it when the rules of the world suddenly change. Number 9. August Bush IV, the end of the tap. August Bush IV inherited one of America's most iconic family empires, Anheuser-Busch. For over 150 years, the Bush family ran the brewery like a private kingdom. They were the masters of American marketing and the titans of St. Louis. August IV was the last of the line, the heir who was supposed to guard the fortress. But August IV carried a reputation that didn't fit the image of a dynastic steward. He was known for a hard partying lifestyle and a history of legal drama that stretched back to his college days. While he was a talented marketer who understood the showman side of the Bush legacy, he lacked the iron grip of his father, August III, who had ruled the company with a legendary, terrifying discipline. The family's grip on the company was already weaker than the mythology suggested. Shareholder patience was thin, and the beer market was changing. When the Belgian giant InBev launched a hostile takeover bid, August IV was unable to rally the board or the family to stop it. He wasn't the guy who personally tanked the brewery, but he was the man in charge when the family finally lost the tap. When the deal went through in 2008, it was the end of an era. The Bush name stayed legendary, but the power was gone. He didn't exactly smash the beer empire with a hammer, but he was the pilot when the plane was sold for parts. For a dynasty built on Budweiser pride, watching a foreign company take the keys was the ultimate sign that the family era was over. Peter Stroh, the spreadsheet knife. Peter Stroh inherited a thriving American brewing dynasty, the Stroh Brewing Company. Unlike some of the more theatrical failures on this list, Peter was a serious businessman. The Stroh name had survived the Civil War, Prohibition, and the Great Depression. They were the working man's beer, a Detroit powerhouse that looked indestructible. Then came the big strategic gamble. In the 1980s, the beer market was consolidating. Peter Stroh decided that the only way to survive was to grow as fast as possible. He began buying up rivals, including the Schlitz Brewing Company, using massive amounts of borrowed money. On paper, it looked like a bold move to challenge Anheuser-Busch and Miller, but the acquisitions were a disaster. Schlitz had quality control issues, and the debt load became a crushing weight. Instead of staying disciplined and protecting the core business, the company overreached. This is the corporate version of a man buying 3 more houses because he thinks confidence is a revenue stream. It was not. The debt piled up, competition squeezed hard, and the fortune that had once seemed untouchable collapsed. Within a decade, the Stroh Brewing Company was forced to sell off its brands and shut down. A multi-billion-dollar family fortune evaporated, leaving hundreds of heirs with a lot less than the family legend promised. No palace coups, no assassins, no magical soldiers, just leverage, hubris, and a spreadsheet sharpening a knife. History is absolutely full of bad decisions, but inheriting the world and handing it back over because you were too bored or too scared to hold it is elite-level incompetence. That is how you turn a dynasty into a footnote in someone else's book. If you liked this deep dive into historical disasters, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people who had it all and lost it anyway.